Hello my dear listener and welcome to our channel. I was in my third month of retirement, adjusting to my new role as a house husband. I was beginning to think my previous job was easier and more fun than cooking and cleaning. We still retained our weekly cleaning lady, so my chores were more about keeping things tidy. Our kids had long flown the nest, so keeping the house tidy wasn't a burden. I had been given a golden handshake as VP of a large bank, and the offer was too good to turn down. My wife Amy and I, Ed Hughes by the way, spent countless hours discussing my retirement offer, and decided it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I was given $250,000 in cash, with a matching amount going into my 401k, plus 50% of my monthly salary for life. I also kept all my other benefits including insurance. At age 58, I found myself without a job for the first time since I was a teenager. I had several things I wanted to explore. Writing was one of them, as I had long aspired to write but never found the time. I also wanted to learn woodworking, something I found fascinating though I had no experience. Amy, my wife of 30 years, is the love of my life. She's 6 years my junior and at 52, she's changed little since the first time we met back in college. She was a junior while I was in graduate school. I fell in love at first sight and courted her tirelessly for 6 months before she agreed to a date. From there, we dated exclusively and married after she graduated. Our 2 children were born during the second and third year of our marriage, and after that I got a vasectomy since we agreed 2 kids were enough. Amy was a fantastic mother and stayed at home until both kids started school. Then she got a job in the HR department of a large regional hospital. She's a very caring and unselfish person, and that shines through when she meets new people. Now, our 2 children are settled in professional jobs with families of their own. Neither lives nearby, but both are within a 4-hour drive. Amy has worked at the hospital for 20 years and was promoted last year to Chief of Human Resources, a position with a lot of responsibility and high expectations. Before I go on, let me tell you a bit more about Amy and me. Amy is slender, with ginger hair, standing at 5 feet 6 inches. She's got shapely legs and a sweet figure. She's always had a strong connection with me, and we've enjoyed an active intimate life. She's attentive and engaged, always making sure we both feel close. I know Amy would be up for more frequent moments together, but I can only manage a couple of times a week. My body needs time to recover. As for me, I'm 58, a bit out of shape, standing at 5 feet 10 inches. One of my retirement goals, besides writing and woodworking, was to lose weight and get back in better condition. Working in a bank doesn't exactly help you stay lean, but with some dedication, I've lost 15 pounds and 2 inches around my waist in just 3 months. I've been going to the gym regularly and my muscle tone has improved. My gym even has a boxing ring, and I hired one of the older trainers to teach me the basics. Boxing is tough, but after a while I started to get the hang of it. My body was changing, and I thought Amy would notice when we spent time together, but she never said a word. I was feeling stronger and healthier, but she seemed preoccupied. One night at dinner I asked her, "You seem distracted lately, like you're in a different world. What's wrong?" Amy hesitated before replying, "Nothing's wrong, I'm just overwhelmed by work." I pressed a little, asking if she wanted to share anything, but she shook her head, saying she just needed to work through it herself. Thanks for asking. So here's where we left it. Amy has to travel every quarter for an HR meeting. She works at a regional hospital, which is part of a larger network of over 40 hospitals scattered across the South. These meetings, where HR chiefs from various cities gather to discuss strategies, staffing, and financial goals, are typically held from Thursday afternoon through Saturday, with everyone returning on Sunday. The meetings usually take place at a Marriott hotel in whichever city is chosen. This would be Amy's 4th time attending. I know she looks forward to these trips, and because of her position I encourage her. Networking with other HR chiefs is very beneficial, and often what works for one can work for all. We usually eat dinner around 6:30, even though Amy officially finishes work at 5 o'clock. She's rarely able to come home by then, so I always plan for dinner a little later. If she's going to be late, she usually sends me a text. The Wednesday before her trip, she texted saying she'd be late because she needed to pick up a few things for the conference. I told her no problem, I'd keep her dinner warm. She got home around 8 o'clock with several bags of clothes. Amy always dresses professionally and has a fashionable wardrobe, so I was surprised she needed so many new things for the trip. I was working on my computer while she packed that night. Later, we shared an intimate moment and fell asleep holding each other. I knew I'd miss her over the next few days, but I also knew that when she returned on Sunday, we'd reconnect in a special way. The next morning, we made breakfast together, and as she got in her car to leave, I felt a tear in my eye. We'd only been apart a handful of times during our marriage, and 4 of those were for these conferences. Amy and I kept in touch while she was gone, texting and calling each other. Before I knew it, she was back and things felt different. She seemed particularly affectionate, and when we reconnected, the experience was even more intense than usual. That Sunday afternoon, she stayed in bed for a while, resting while I prepared dinner. We shared a nice bottle of wine during dinner, but after that she went back to bed, citing exhaustion. I cleaned up, spent a little time on the computer, and then joined her. The next morning was busy as she got ready for work, and just before she left she asked me to do her laundry. It was unusual because she always handled it herself after returning from a trip, but she had seemed so tired the day before that I didn't think much of it. I collected her clothes from the bedroom and the bathroom as I always do, and when I went to turn her pants inside out before washing them, I found a pair of thongs inside. I was surprised. I had asked Amy for years to wear thongs, but she always refused, saying they were uncomfortable. Naturally, I was stunned. Why had she bought and worn them? Surely not for me. I wasn't even there. A wave of emotion washed over me, and I had to sit down. I started to wonder if there was something else going on, if maybe my wife had been unfaithful. The thought of it made me question everything. I decided to check for more clues. I searched her closet and drawers, but didn't find anything unusual. Then I saw her suitcase, still sitting in the closet. Oddly, it was locked. We had matching Samsonite suitcases, so I used my key to open hers. Inside, I found a pair of Jimmy Choo heels with 4-inch heels. Amy has never worn anything higher than 3 inches, and she wouldn't usually spend that much money on shoes she rarely wears. There was also a Ziploc bag with some lingerie, racy thongs, half-cup bras, stockings, and nightgowns. I was speechless. I put everything back and locked the suitcase again, trying to figure out what to do. I loved Amy more than anyone in the world. She was my rock and we did everything together. I couldn't imagine life without her. That evening, during dinner, I brought it up. I found something strange in the laundry, I said. She looked curious and asked what it was. I'll show you, I replied. I got up, retrieved the thong and placed it on the table. I found this rolled up in your pants. I've asked you for years to wear thongs and you've always refused. Is there something you want to tell me? She hesitated for a moment and then said, I bought them for you. Okay, but why did you wear them while you were away? I asked. She rarely got angry, but I could see her face turning red, signaling that she was about to lose her temper. You've never been jealous or questioned anything I've ever done, I replied. You've never given me a reason to be jealous or question you, Amy retorted, her frustration evident. Why are you questioning me now? I have never been unfaithful, not once. Just explain the things and we'll drop it. Well, you've been asking me for years to buy some, so I did. I wore a pair to see how they felt, I said. Okay, did you buy anything else you want to share? No, I replied shortly. We dropped the subject, but I realized my investigation needed to be stepped up. Amy hadn't been entirely honest and hadn't mentioned the other items in her suitcase. I went to work on my computer and eventually Amy went upstairs. I checked the kitchen for her purse and cell phone but didn't find them. Her laptop was still on the table, so I took it into my computer room and locked the door. I checked her home email and found nothing unusual. Her work email was also clear. I noticed the Yahoo account in the history but couldn't access it without the username and password. I needed to check her cell phone. The next morning I woke up to the sound of the shower but didn't know how long Amy had been in there. Her purse was on the dresser, so I quickly grabbed her cell phone and unlocked it. Her text messages revealed nothing. I typed Yahoo Mail in the browser, and since her username and password were saved, I had access. I discovered that David, the man in question, was the HR chief at a hospital several states away. He had been asking Amy to dress provocatively and be more open with him. From what I gathered, they hadn't had sex but had made out seriously. Amy seemed reluctant. I heard the shower turn off, so I quickly closed everything and returned her phone to its place. I had David's first name, his workplace, and some personal details. I used this information to find his full name and history. A quick call to a lawyer friend who has connections with the local police led to the discovery that David had been charged with, but not convicted of 3 counts of sexual harassment. While the charges had been dropped, it suggested a troubling pattern. Determined to not only expose David but also ensure he couldn't be involved with Amy, I continued my investigation. The next morning I accessed Amy's cell phone again, found the Yahoo Mail password and logged in. The password was the name of Amy's first childhood dog, a detail she had often mentioned. I discovered David's emails, which were like love letters. He had been pursuing Amy since their first conference, slowly escalating his advances. By the last conference he had reached second base, seemingly hoping for more at the next meeting. I printed out copies of all his emails, which read like love letters. It was clear to me that David was trying to groom Amy. Her responses were typical, brief, and to the point. She didn't want an affair, and at the last conference, things had advanced further than she was comfortable with. I started developing a plan for the next conference, aiming to gather enough evidence to take action, while also preventing any further inappropriate interactions. I went to Best Buy and bought a mini camera with a transmitter that worked over Wi-Fi. I only had to pair it with my tablet computer after downloading the necessary software. Amy spends a considerable amount of time in her bedroom each night, so I placed the camera there. It had an audio receiver, allowing me to hear and see what was going on. That night, after dinner, Amy went upstairs while I stayed in the computer room. I turned on the camera, and my tablet displayed a view of Amy in her bed. She was relaxing and reading a novel. After about an hour, her cell phone rang. It was David. Luckily, Amy put the conversation on speakerphone. They talked about work, and David mentioned he was looking forward to the next conference to see the different lingerie Amy had bought. Amy didn't promise anything but simply said, "We'll see." David's comments seemed calculated, and Amy appeared uncomfortable as she fidgeted. I knew I needed to act, so I made some noise going up the stairs and found Amy reading her novel. I brushed my teeth and got into bed beside her. I told her, "I love you to the moon and back, and as you know, I've never looked at another woman. I would be crushed if I ever found you with someone else. You know my feelings on infidelity, this is all I think about. I've never been unfaithful and have no intention to be. What brought on this sudden jealousy?" Amy responded, "I'm sorry, but since finding that thong I've been confused. I want to believe you, but part of me thinks otherwise. I wish I had never bought it." Weeks passed and I continued monitoring the mini camera. David called Amy weekly and they were planning for the conference, so was I. The camera worked perfectly, so I decided to buy another one and install it in Amy's room while she was at a meeting. My goal was to monitor her actions, not to invade her privacy for personal gratification. The week of the conference arrived and it was in New Orleans, a city that might complicate my plans. I watched Amy pack for 2 days and saw nothing unusual. However, when I took out the trash, I noticed a separate bag in her car's trunk. I suspected she would swap out her clothes at the airport. Amy left the next morning with a kiss and an "I love you." I followed her 3 hours later, and at the hotel check-in, I explained that I was Amy's husband and was meeting her. After showing my ID, they gave me a key to her room. Knowing she would be in a meeting from 3 to 5 o'clock, I quickly set up the mini camera in her room, aiming for a view from the door to the bed. Setting up the camera took only 10 minutes. I then approached the check-in desk again, finding a different person working. I requested a room on the same floor as Amy, but a few doors away, to stay as close as possible while being within range of the transmitter. My excuse was to be near the elevator. Luckily, I was assigned a room 3 doors down. Unfortunately, setting up the camera proved challenging. I spent hours trying to establish a connection between the camera, the hotel's Wi-Fi, and my tablet, but I was unsuccessful. The hotel Wi-Fi was much more complicated than the home network, and I couldn't get the camera to connect. Feeling frustrated and disconnected, I decided to call Amy. She answered quickly, surprised by my early call. I told her I was having a strange dream and needed to hear her voice to feel better. We spoke briefly, and she reassured me before heading out to dinner. I mentioned not to have too much fun on Bourbon Street, which made her laugh. While she was out, I slipped into her room and left a dozen red roses with a note saying, "So you won't forget me." After she returned to her room, she called me again, thanked me for the roses, and mentioned her dinner was pleasant with some other female HR chiefs. I asked her to switch to FaceTime so I could see her. I noticed her blouse was undone and asked about it. She said she was getting ready for bed. We said goodnight, and I felt anxious about enduring the next 2 days. On Friday afternoon after the conference ended, I waited in a bar until I saw Amy and David head to her room. After giving them 45 minutes, I entered her room. They were so engrossed in each other that they didn't notice me. I took several photos and a short video with my phone. Eventually I made my presence known. Amy quickly separated from David, trying to tidy herself up. I told David to leave immediately. Although he wasn't scared of me, he left feeling humiliated. I turned to Amy and asked her to explain what was going on. She apologized and admitted she was confused. She loved me but craved the attention from David. She told me his name was David Becker, and that their interactions had started at the first conference and continued since then. She confessed they had been kissing and that she had allowed him to touch her, though she claimed it hadn't gone further. I questioned her about whether she understood that their interactions could lead to more. Amy began to cry and asked if I would stay the weekend with her, as she didn't trust herself to be alone. She lay down, and I watched over her for an hour before waking her. Her eyes were red and swollen. I was extremely angry and hurt but suggested, "Let's dress up and go out to dinner and dancing. Let's try to put this mess behind us. If you want me to stay with you, I will. That man won't get near you again." Amy dressed in some of the sexy clothes she had bought, which made her feel embarrassed. She put on a half bra, a thong, thigh-high stockings and a figure-hugging black dress with heels. I told her that seeing her in these clothes, which were obviously for David, hurt me. She apologized and promised to wear whatever I asked in the future. Dinner was good, though I ate too much and felt sluggish afterward. We went back to the hotel bar. The dance floor was crowded and Amy wanted to dance. Thanks to my exercise routine, I was in good shape and enjoyed dancing without getting tired. We had a good time until I excused myself to use the bathroom. When I returned, Amy was on the dance floor with David. I intervened, telling David to keep his hands off my wife now and in the future, and warned him he was lucky I hadn't confronted him earlier. David, who was much larger than me, laughed off my threat and took the first swing. I was caught off guard but managed to get back on my feet. Despite the size difference, I sidestepped him and landed several punches. My gym training paid off, and though David tried to keep coming, I was able to defend myself effectively. Eventually, I kicked him and delivered a final series of blows that left him on the floor. I warned him to stay away from my wife before walking away. Amy rushed to David's side, which confirmed where her loyalty lay. I paid the bill and left, deciding not to press charges despite the barman's offer to smooth things over with the police. I spent the night alone in my old room, unsure if Amy stayed in her own room or with David. The next morning, after removing the camera, I checked out and flew home. When Amy arrived back, I was in the kitchen with my suitcases packed. She asked, "Ed, why did you leave Friday night?" I replied, "Why should I stay? I didn't see much of a marriage left. You decided who you wanted to be with and it wasn't me." She apologized, saying she was concerned about David's injuries. I responded, "Look at my eye. Does it look normal to you? You spent Friday night with him, and probably all day Saturday too. I can't believe you lied about it." Amy said, "I didn't have sex with him." "I'm tired of your lies," I said. "We've had 30 years of happiness, and you threw it all away for a weekend with him. Did you know he had been charged with sexual harassment 3 times? Amy looked shocked. "No, I didn't know that. You have lied and deceived me for the past several months. I can't express how much you've hurt me. I was onto your game almost from the beginning." Amy looked ashamed. "I beg for your forgiveness. I'm so sorry. I was pressured by David but I didn't give in. I can't prove it but you'll have to take my word." I asked, "So you want me to believe you? Why should I trust you now?" Amy responded, "I'm telling the truth. I noticed she wasn't wearing panties." "And what about this? Where are your panties?" Amy explained, "I assumed it was from this morning just before you left. I'm sorry, it was only one time. Please believe me. After the beating you gave David, he came to my room just before I left for the airport and demanded we have sex. He pressured me until I finally consented. I picked up my suitcases and said, 'My lawyer will be in touch. Be prepared to be destroyed.' I left, feeling betrayed despite all my efforts to save the marriage. Amy had no intentions of staying faithful. If not that weekend, it would have been the next time." Now, let's check the story from Amy's side. A little over a year ago, I was promoted to Chief of HR, a prestigious role I was proud of. My husband Ed noticed how I had changed. Part of my job required attending quarterly meetings with other HR chiefs. At the first conference, I met David, an HR chief from another state. David frequently flirted with me, and though I tried to maintain boundaries, his advances grew more persistent. By the third conference, he started kissing me, which flattered me but conflicted with my values. I kept reminding him that I was happily married and didn't want an affair. Despite this, David's advances continued, and he managed to touch me inappropriately. I kept my resolve and didn't let it go further, although he certainly tried. I told myself he was harmless and enjoyed his attention, being flattered by a younger man's interest. When I returned from the conference, Ed found a thong in my dirty laundry. He was hurt and accused me of having an affair, which I denied. Although I hadn't had intercourse, I was deceiving Ed by maintaining what I considered a platonic relationship with David. As the next conference approached, I packed my clothes carefully, hiding them to avoid Ed's scrutiny. During the conference, David's advances continued. He was persistent, and while I resisted, my resolve weakened at times. A phone call from Ed distracted David, and I agreed to meet Ed for dinner. The dinner was lovely, and Ed's gesture of sending roses reminded me of my vows, leading me to once again refuse David's advances. Despite this, David continued to pursue me. During lunch the next day, we nearly crossed the line but ran out of time. By the time we were back in my room, David was all over me, and just as things were getting intense, Ed barged in. I tried to assure Ed that David and I hadn't had sex, but he didn't believe me. He felt that the kissing, the phone calls, and the sexy clothes were enough to betray our trust. I hadn't seen it that way before, but he was right. I was deeply ashamed. I asked Ed to stay the weekend with me, hoping to make things right. Even though I felt like staying in bed and crying, I agreed to go out to dinner with him. Dressed in my provocative underwear and clothes, which I had never worn for Ed, I felt even more guilty. We enjoyed dinner and then went dancing at the hotel. We were having a great time until Ed went to the bathroom and David appeared. He insisted on having a slow dance with me, clearly wanting to make Ed jealous. David was much bigger than Ed, but an excellent dancer. I interrupted their dance and told David to stay away from me. David called Ed a coward and tried to intimidate him. Then he hit Ed in the side of the head, stunning him. Ed slowly got back on his feet, and David continued to taunt him and try to hit him again. This time, Ed was prepared and fought back, landing several hits before David ended up on the floor. Seeing David hurt, I went to his side to check on him, but Ed thought I was siding with David and left the hotel. I was shocked by Ed's reaction. Despite being overweight and out of shape, he had fought bravely against a much larger opponent. I didn't think Ed was capable of such violence. I managed to get David back to his room and stayed with him. He was in considerable pain and was still bedridden on Saturday. We ordered room service and I kept ice packs on his injuries. I said goodbye to him Saturday night. He looked better but was still not back to normal, and we didn't have any physical contact. On Sunday morning, as I was rushing to pack for my early flight, David knocked on the door. He pushed his way in and demanded we have sex before I left. He was forceful, and despite my resistance, he was determined. I tried to delay him by insisting on using protection, knowing we didn't have any, but he produced a condom. He proceeded aggressively, and I found myself unexpectedly aroused by his intensity. David's actions left me physically and emotionally drained. Afterward, I hastily cleaned up, grabbed my bags and left, feeling overwhelmed and ashamed. The journey home was a blur and I didn't properly clean up, which I later regretted. Returning home, I was distressed to see the extent of Ed's injuries, and we argued fiercely. Eventually I confessed everything that happened, but Ed didn't give me a chance to explain. He left and I collapsed in shock, realizing my marriage had collapsed. Reflecting on the weekend, I recognized that my actions had misled David and that his reaction, though extreme, was partly my fault. I regretted opening the door to him and felt the weight of my betrayal. Back at home, I checked into the Hilton and decided to talk to my children. Using a conference call, I explained the situation and our plans for a divorce. They were heartbroken and we all cried during the call. Amy soon called, angry at me for telling the children and turning them against her. I was confused and hurt by her reaction. That night I sent screenshots of David with Amy, first kissing her, then her topless in bed and more, to David's wife. I felt it was only fair that she knew the truth, even though it wouldn't undo the pain. The next morning I contacted my lawyer and was referred to a reputable divorce attorney. I went to the bank to divide our assets, including my severance pay and 401k, canceling all joint credit cards and getting one solely in my name. Amy's cell phone was from the hospital. That afternoon, I saw the divorce lawyer and instructed him to be aggressive. I was tired of being the nice guy and wanted him to serve Amy as soon as possible. I also called the hospital's CEO in Atlanta, managing to get a brief meeting with him. I explained how David Becker had inappropriately pursued my wife during HR conferences and provided copies of all related emails. I questioned why the hospital would hire someone with multiple charges of sexual harassment, even if they were not convicted. The CEO was taken aback and promised to investigate. I gave him my fax number to send the email copies and offered to send more photographic evidence if needed. I requested that Becker be terminated, making it clear that while my wife shouldn't be penalized for this situation, she also shouldn't lose her job because of it. That evening, Amy called me, having calmed down. She asked why I had sent the photos and if I was in trouble. I explained that David's wife had shared the photos with the hospital and that David had been fired. Amy was concerned that everything would come out in the divorce court and warned me that the divorce would get messy. I was charging her with adultery, which would complicate things further. Amy expressed concern about David's situation and his family, which included 3 children. I pointed out that her actions had caused significant harm to our own family, and why she was more worried about David's troubles than ours.